I stopped using social media 5 or 6 years ago. Everyone was highly unprepared for what social media would do to the advertising and media industry. Conceivably, we will replace humans with machines. Now, media is, I think, really fighting for its life. The way that traditional media brands got built is no more. We need a free and open and thriving media landscape. It's a requisite check and balance in our society. You don't need humans to create that content going forward.
Generalized content creation, that's already game over.
A new huge channel for D2C marketing will emerge. You're going to see some brands that get very big very quickly. Amazon makes more sense for agentic shopping than just about anything. How do you stick to it for a decade and continue to build for a world that is not real yet? The Googles and Amazons and Metas, they have the data advantage. They have the money.
Meet Ben Lerer, co-founder and managing director with Lerer Hippeau, a venture firm investing successfully at the seed stage in both B2C and B2B companies. With the backdrop of OpenAI projecting revenue growth from $25 billion to $284 billion by 2030, we unpack what that could mean as opportunity for new entrants, as well as venture capital, as entire industries from media to advertising to online shopping get massively disrupted by this coming AI tsunami.
This is exactly when you want to be a VC. A lot of money can be made. It is also the most dangerous time to do this job. It's magic.
Welcome, Ben. Excited to have you on the show, and looking forward to this. Yeah, looking forward to our conversation today. So I found out recently that you are a New York Times crossword puzzle addict. Is that true?
I'll tell you, it has been true, although I am cutting it off. I'm out. I will do the mini and the MIDI, but I won't. I'm trying not to do the big ones because I spend too much time. I don't want to be on my phone. And so I'm trying to unwind my habit. I stopped using social media probably like 5 or 6 years ago, but then got these other addictive phone habits as we do. And the crossword puzzle has been one, and I'm trying to wean myself off.
Okay. Do you still read the news, though? Tech news?
I still read the news. I do read the
Okay.
news. I mean, obviously the news is pretty upsetting most of the time.
Right.
But I still read the New York Times every day. But I do not let myself fall down
Get
the
sucked.
Twitter
Yeah.
X rabbit hole very
Rabbit
often.
hole. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Talking of New York Times and, traditional media, I mean, your firm, Lerer Hippeau, has some very amazing and impressive roots. So some of it's your colleagues in the past, and then you yourself really understand the media business extremely well. I mean, your co-founder colleague, Eric Hippeau, long back when, I think, was CEO of Zip Davis, which owned
Yep.
PC Magazine, then was on the board of Yahoo, started Huffington Post with Ariana Huffington, sold that very successfully. You yourself founded a media company, Thrillist, I think, right out of college or soon after, and went through a very entrepreneurial journey there, and then sold it successfully to Vox Media in 2022?
Yeah, I think it was 4 years ago this week.
4 years ago this week, so congratulations. And so I bring that up because media is at the very center of sort of almost a fight for its survival right now, with all this sort of AI transformation to AI happening. And I was just looking at OpenAI's recent revenue announcements. They have crossed $25 billion in annualized revenue as at the end of last month. They're projecting something like $284 billion by 2030. And while they are in over 50% of that is apparently still from the subscription to ChatGPT. So just to protect that revenue and to keep growing that revenue, they have to keep improving and keep ChatGPT relevant. And the core of that relevancy is the content that model is continuously trolling, and a lot of it belongs to big media. And so this is sort of a big battle, And this time around, my sense, again, as a non-media expert, seems to be that media seems to be a little bit more prepared to fight. What is
Then
your
they
view?
did it in social media.
That's right, than they did in social media. I'm just curious. I mean, a couple of things are standing out. OpenAI obviously has competition. Amazon's cut a deal with large publishers, including the New York Times, for something like 20 to 25 million a year to train Alexa and some of their other models. Folks like Microsoft are launching marketplaces where publishers can sell their content to AI bots and AI
Well,
models. As a media person, what is your counsel to, as an ex-media person who
yes,
really
please.
understands, ex-media person who understands that side of the table, what would your counsel be to traditional publishers of content?
So media was challenged before AI. Now media is, um, I think, really fighting for its life. And look, you have the New York Times and the Journal and a few traditional media outlets that have done, I think, a fabulous job sort of navigating the twists and turns that have been thrown at it by social media and by AI. I mean, obviously, you've seen stuff like the New York Times is, I don't want to say it's a gaming company, but a huge percentage of their revenue and audience is now using the Times for um, crosswords and Wordle and other things. And it's like they have evolved. They've also been able to build a model where they have a large customer pay business and a large advertising business and a large events business, and sort of have built like a multidisciplinary brand. But it's also a 100+ year old brand that sits in the like true tiny, tiny, tiny echelon of like media royalty. You've seen a few folks that have continued to thrive in that space, but the whole startup ecosystem that we invested in the early days has really been decimated. And I think now, where you're going to see media bifurcate is you're going to see a bunch of folks, like there is an opportunity to build good personality driven businesses that are probably not going to be venture scale, but maybe on like the most aspirational side could look something like Barry Weiss's business, prior to selling it, right? Like a I look at the information as another example, like strong brands with solid revenue models, but that speak to a very specific niche that look more like, almost B2B rather than B2C media in some way. Um, and then I think mainstream media, obviously you have YouTube sort of dominating, and the huge influencer businesses that are being built on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok. But the way that traditional media brands got built uh, is no more. And it's upsetting, and I think pretty scary, because we need a free and open and thriving media landscape to sort of make sure that like it's a requisite check and balance in our society, and it's being undermined right now.
Yep, and perhaps some as a ardent reader of the information, I agree with you. Sort of the more focused and perhaps the more digital native, digital savvy businesses will also be able to protect the content better against sort of AI, or monetize their leverage over AI more smartly than traditional media. So, and
And look,
certainly,
but like the information is an access business, right? Like they are going in. I think analysis is increasingly going to be able to be done or augmented by AI. What's not is breaking news, being inside of like sort of the room where it happens and knowing the nuances of how business is getting done. And I think, the information is a good example of something that is on the inside and that's going to have enduring value as a result of that access. When that access goes away, the value will erode very, very, very quickly. But generalized content creation, a lot of the sort of what the internet has been built on, sort of these listicles and memes, are like that content is not, you don't need humans to create that content going forward. And that's what SEO is built on. And that's what a bunch of social brands were built on. And it's going to be really hard to imagine that being a place where there are scaled, thriving businesses existing.
okay. So just to summarize what you said, it's sort of media really needs to rethink what it needs to be about. You're saying access could be access immediacy, But generalized content creation or summarization, that's already game over, right? So game over.
It feels like game
Right.
over already,
Yeah.
whether or not everybody wants
Right.
to sort of acknowledge it.
Yeah. Okay. Another place where you personally and Lerer Hippeau as a firm has tremendous insight, experience, success is commerce, e-commerce, consumer businesses. So again, going back to that astounding revenue projection by OpenAI of hitting 200 whatever 90 billion by 2030. I mean, it's hard to imagine how they're going to get there without, without their tentacles in many other pots than subscription revenue, right? So ad revenue obviously is probably front
Yep.
and center. And then e-commerce revenue, they just announced abandoning their preliminary shop through ChatGPT plans, but that certainly starts shedding light on what OpenAIs of the world are thinking about OpenAI and sort of the big model providers. Where do you see that as an opportunity for young companies? First, maybe before we get to the young companies, what does it mean for that big aggregator, e-commerce aggregator world, if model providers do get into directly into e-commerce and shopping? And number two, what could be an opening for young companies if that
Yeah.
happens?
So I wouldn't put that as an if. I think it is an inevitability that, big tech, and maybe you could put, you know, an open AI, certainly aspiring to be big tech, into that category. Um, these companies are going to touch every facet of the economy. I mean, they need to go into markets that have enormous TAM. And if you really think about it, there's a new interface for how we access the web, um, and access information. And so, uh, needless to say, anyone who is a large generalized large language model is going to be figuring out how that large language model monetizes in all different facets, and commerce is going to be one of them. I think the way that we shop is going to continue to augment and change. I actually think there's probably a really interesting window in the next few years where, as OpenAI sort of creates more shoppable interfaces and experiences, you'll have a moment for brands to go and sort of master that uh, canvas, like you had in the early days of TikTok or the early days of Instagram ads, or going back, 12, 15 years when Facebook advertising was novel. And so you're probably actually going to have this sort of interesting arbitrage moment where a new huge channel for D2C marketing will emerge. And you're going to see some brands that get very big very quickly who sort of like win on OpenAI shopping. And you've seen that with each of the big platform shifts before it. And I think you can see it again. And by the way, the same thing will happen with Google Shopping and a massive evolution of whatever Google Shopping looks like. And I'm sure huge changes will come to the entire shopping experience that Amazon has. Amazon makes more sense for agentic shopping than just about anything, in terms of just like these recurring purchases that you buy on a regular basis that you could probably take the human entirely out of. Um, and so I think it's going to be a really interesting moment for uh, for commerce. At the end of the day, a lot of the kinds of commerce we did in the early days were uh, it was when you actually needed to go build your own technology, and like there was a technology advantage if you could go and raise enough money to hire a certain kind of developer to build a certain kind of platform and build analytics and build tools. That technology advantage went away almost entirely with Shopify and the growth of the Shopify ecosystem, and is going to go away even more with everybody having access to better and better and cheaper tools through this next evolution of AI tooling for commerce in every sort of nook and cranny of the industry. It's going to shift pressure back to what's the actual product that you're selling, what's the brand that you're building, what kind of unfair distribution advantages do you have as a new commerce brand. I don't think it's just as simple as make a thing that looks like an Insta, that's going to like stand out in the feed. I think you really do need to, like, the onus is going to be higher on a brand to need to actually make something that customers love.
Yeah, we always go back to that. So if we play that back to
Yeah.
you're saying sort of as if not if, when these model providers get in big time into e-commerce, it opens up an opportunity for new companies to
Yep.
really ride the coattails of that new distribution model, if you will. I'll just use that as a shorthand. But they have to really think hard about sort of what is their core defensibility long term. What is it that they're selling? How are they selling it? Do they have a distribution advantage? All the things that we sort of know about in commerce. Speaking of commerce, you guys have a very exciting portfolio company that I think you invested in quite some time ago, which is in the delivery business. So we touched on Amazon having a big advantage in e-commerce if they get agentification, but this company is, and Amazon has been making a lot of news about drone delivery. But your portfolio company Zipline
Zipline.
is
Okay, I wasn't sure
already
if you were going to say Zipline or Hungryroot. I didn't know which direction you were going. Okay.
Okay, okay.
Yes. Okay.
So
Zipline.
we'll
Yes.
go to Hungryroot as well.
Okay.
But
Great.
so commerce to delivery at my doorstep, and so this is already very exciting stuff that is happening. It's not quite LLM shopping yet, but it is instant delivery.
Yep.
Tell us more about that investment.
Yeah. And look, I mean, this is an investment from one of our earlier funds that took the sort of same long winding road that many great companies take. But when we invested in it, they were building uh, robots that were thought to be toys for children. That was like the original concept for the business was uh, to take advantage of like shrinking hardware costs to go and create smart toys. This is back a decade ago. The company sort of morphed and pivoted into um, going over to Africa and creating fixed wing uh, planes, sort of gliders that delivered critical supplies across Africa in places where getting blood to a patient would take many hours, if not days, with the sort of infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure that existed, and they built a delivery network to deliver again these critical medical supplies. That through that they became world class at building these different kinds of uh, drone and sort of fixed wing devices. All of that eventually landing in them sort of like refocusing on commercialization in the U.S. and building uh, drones that are now being used for last mile delivery for e-commerce. Specifically, now their first big deployment is in Dallas with Walmart, and I mean, imagine going and placing the same order that you might place with Amazon for like same day delivery or Walmart for same day delivery, but instead of getting it off of a truck that goes and runs a route at some point, 8 or 10 hours later, getting it in 8 minutes
Yeah, that
to your house. I mean, it's magic. It's like one of these things that is, if you go back, like my grandmother would see this and like, collapse on the ground and think that like, uh, but, but a really extraordinary business. But again, with the like how do you stick to it for a decade and continue to build for a world that is not real yet? And keep that sort of momentum and keep that belief. And by the way, having to deal with the FAA and deal with beyond visual line of sight and true autonomous flight, it's a very similar trajectory to what you've seen Waymo go through with driverless cars. This sort of idea, 10 or 15 years ago, that now you see out in the wild, and it blows your mind.
yeah. There's so much to unpack there. So phenomenal story. Started as a gaming toy, went to Africa for critical deliveries, back to the US, and now doing e-commerce fulfillment. And if a giant deal with Walmart, that's not an easy deal to sign and to get. So fantastic job by the
No, and they've
founders.
signed
And
many of the sort of largest national retailers who are interested in getting into this business. And by the way, it'll be interesting over time to see, you know, the as a logistics company, there is the providing logistics services layer without your brand where you are powering Walmart delivery. But look what Uber Eats has gone and done, where you actually build an app and an interface around it, where at some point, is there a world where people are shopping through Zipline versus shopping through Walmart powered by Zipline? I don't know exactly sort of like how that goes, but if you have enough big brands and you have enough of an installed, you know, proprietary delivery network, uh, you can see this becoming a really big company,
Right.
like not a logistics provider, but like the front door and the back door.
That's right. So if they build their brand, so if they build their brand directly with the consumer as that reliable delivery at my front door, at my or back step, they could then start upseating the business of some of of their initial partners. So the opportunity here could be
Yeah.
absolutely huge. Yeah, and that actually is just ties back to what you said, what we talked about earlier, which is if the OpenAIs of the world do get into the e-commerce business, this is the opening for new entrants
Yes.
from which you can build either you could be selling to the incumbents to give them the defensibility that they need against the OpenAIs of the world, or you can establish a new brand, bigger businesses with an advantage in distribution models that are not even known yet, right? That are all to come in the future.
A- Absolutely. And I mean, just think about food delivery. Imagine, why would you ever, if there's an option to get food delivery in 8 minutes that comes warm and immediate, like you start to make choices based on that experience. Like, are you available via Zipline or not? If not, I'm not ordering you anymore. Like, get with the program. And I think it can be transformative, and it'll be interesting to see how the big, like how vertical integration continues with the big tech companies as the company, you look back 20 years ago when you had sort of like the rise of, mobile or cloud, the incumbents were not well positioned to thrive in that next sort of tech cycle. Today, the biggest companies in the world are very well set up to get a lot of, if not most, fit from AI. The Googles and Amazons and Metas, I mean, they have the data
That's right.
advantage,
That's
they have
right.
the money. And by the way, we're in a regulatory environment right now where they could probably be buyers for the first time in quite a while. It wouldn't be crazy if you started to see some very large transactions getting done. I
Hmm.
could imagine some of these companies going out. I mean, I can't speak to A, I'm not in the information flow, and B, I'm such a long-term believer in Zipline as an independent company. But like, if I was the CEO of OpenAI and I'm thinking about, 10 years out, 15 years out, what does the future of commerce look like? I probably want to own a company like Zipline.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Because they're making up for, in many ways, by really leapfrogging into the future, they're making up for some small details like inventory management that can all be figured out, right? So, so it's like go where your long-term advantage will be, leapfrog into that versus, and the details of what the Amazons in the world Walmarts have built over the years,
Yep.
that'll fall in place. That's known recipe. But if you go after something bold like a zip line, then you're going where these guys will have a hard time going.
Yeah,
So
and by the way,
excellent,
you
yeah,
can't
yeah.
enter that space. I mean, I believe at this point, Zipline has flown more autonomous miles than both Waymo and Tesla have driven autonomous miles combined.
So Zipline has done 2 million deliveries and 125 million autonomous miles completed. That's absolutely
125
correct.
million autonomous miles. And so
That's
that
right.
that is a compounding advantage. You can't show up tomorrow and say, I think this is a
That's
fun
right.
idea. Let me go buy a drone and compete with Zipline.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, switching from warm delivery, or delivery at my doorstep to warm delivery, or maybe healthy delivery at my
I actually
doorstep,
think
you guys.
not warm delivery, but
No,
but
okay.
yes.
Right. So to food delivery at my doorstep, you guys have another very exciting company that I watch, and that's more in line with my healthy eating habits, and that's Hungry Roots, and that company is doing extremely well.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about that market. What's happening in this whole meal prep, meal delivery, healthy eating market? Catch us up on
Yeah,
what's the trend line there.
so By the way, another great example of a company that took a lot of twists and turns. Hungryroot's a company, when we backed it, they were making a few SKUs of sort of better for you. It was actually really like better for you dessert. I think the first SKU that they had was a better for you cookie dough. In retrospect, I'm like, what were we doing investing in this company? But we had known Ben, the CEO, for a long time. It was really a very early founder bet on someone who would like, you know, slam their head against the wall a lot and find their way to something big. Um, and um, what Hungryroot ultimately became is what it's really becoming. And I don't know that the company would talk about it this way explicitly, but I think about it as an agent to do your shopping for you. But an agent that there's going to be a lot of people that build food agents. And by the way, you can go to OpenAI or you can go to ChatGPT, and I think some like somewhat shocking percentage of searches are relating to people building meal plans and shopping lists. And I think someone told me recently that it was a top three use case for OpenAI was people was involved in cooking and meal planning, which I can sort of believe. The challenge is that connecting the back end fulfillment to the front end experience is really, really, really difficult. And so you could imagine Amazon doing this with owning Whole Foods and owning the distribution and owning a ton of owning a ton of data. But um, you're going to see this explosion of 1,000 front end applications playing in the space. But at the end of the day, they're relying on the inventory that exists across a sort of network of supermarkets, not unlike what you have with Instacart. And by the way, we're Instacart customers in my house, but um, that is a actually quite uh, there's a lot of back and forth involved in that experience with your shopper. There's a lot of mistakes, uh, and there is also a big disconnect in terms of the sizes of the packages that you're getting, connecting to like your eating habits and the way that you want to and health, b how you actually cook, and quantities for recipes, and c for trying new things or trying new brands. It's built on you like doing like buying the exact same stuff all the time, and and removing the need to go to the supermarket, which might not have the thing that you want. And what Hungryroot has done is really meticulously over a long period of time build out the infrastructure on the back end to be they control all their own inventory. I think probably about half, if not more than half, of the products that Hungryroot sells are proprietary to them. Um, and they're going out and allowing you as a user to tell them about your eating habits, what you want, both generally and of course over time it gets to know you very specifically, and it sends you your weekly groceries in the mail. It changes over time, so you get to try new brands so you don't get sick of things. It proposes different dishes that you should be cooking that meet your health goals, and sends you the right quantity of food for the number of people in your family based on how you're eating. And uh, it is it's really a I sort of think about it as it's like an AI. Increasingly it's going to be an AI front end. Of course, they're using AI in terms of how they're doing inventory planning and how they're mapping users, habits and whatnot. But it's going to be more of an AI front end, agentic shopping on the front end with very sophisticated um, and totally controlled inventory on the back end. And I think it's sort of like the future of what grocery shopping should be for it's not going to be for everybody, but for a certain customer base who um, has specific health goals. Um, that is, people. There's people who are in markets where they don't have like really easy access to, um, the market or all the food that they want, and um, they built a real hell of a company there. Ben has just done an exquisite job. Um,
Yeah, I think sort of you touched on many, many very
I know
important
I'm
points there.
rambling.
For no, no, you're not rambling at all. I think sort of you're just a fast brain talking fast. So let me just come back to a couple of points here. I think just going back to that whole OpenAI when getting into shopping. The reason they abandoned it is because it is far more complicated, right? Today, just to have the inventory data and to get stuff accurate when I check out, that ain't a simple problem. Over time, they're going to solve it. There are lots of people. I mean, Amazon has a huge advantage there, obviously built over 25 years. But for the rest of, rest of the world, it's a threat. So what you're saying is that if young companies or pure play startups want to get into this business of whether they're selling me food, healthy food, or whether they're sending me fashion, whatever, right? They have to think now in a post AI world, what truly is their advantage? What you just said about Hungryroot is that true advantage here is really knowing through AI the customer extremely well, and therefore then really managing their quality of their inventory, the quantity of the inventory, their inventory sort of costs, if you will, right? Their asset
Yep.
asset load, if you will, through AI in a very, very precise manner that an AI native company is able to do. So gone are the days of just sort of old inventory management, old asset heavy businesses, but extreme and precise focus that AI can give you. So, right. So at least
You
that's
know,
what I heard. So you
and
say,
it's
so those,
interesting when you talk about the idea. You're like, what are the businesses that OpenAI will need to be in to go from 25 billion-dollar run rate hemorrhaging cash to a $300 billion top line business in 5 years. I do think that you're going to see big tech look at the biggest markets the same way that you would go back and look at the Amazon Whole Foods deal and people were like, what is going on? This is a traditional grocery store. And like, one of the greatest like forward looking technology companies ever. 5 years later, 6 years later, 8 years later, it like makes perfect sense that they're together. I don't know that I see, if OpenAI or Google or whatever are going to get into the business of trying to own supermarkets. But if you did, I think that the way to do it would be to go and own Hungryroot rather than go and own Kroger. And
that's right.
uh, if you just took the top of it, just knowing how many people are looking for meal planning on these large language models, and if you could really close the loop on being able to fulfill that, not by saying here's a link to go do Instacart, but actually complete the full loop of having control over that inventory, that's the kind of place where you could see extreme scale very quickly.
That's right. That's right. So we are glimpsing into the future of many things. I 100% agree with you. There is just no way for to go from 25 to 300 billion in 5 years without going after the big pockets of revenue. So ads will be displaced, e-commerce will be displaced, many others. And your point is, forget about the legacy businesses, go for the pure play AI native companies as potential acquisition targets, which
Yeah, I
really
mean,
set you up for future scale, right?
look at Google. I mean, Google has a Zipline competitor called Wing. Google has Waymo. Look at the sort of surface area of these tech giants in terms of the
That's
other
right.
businesses that they get into. Obviously, all these companies now thinking about different versions of wearables, including what OpenAI will
Uh-huh.
do with Jonty Ive's company and whatever that will look like. You hear
Yeah,
Apple moving into a bunch of new kinds of like lighter weight wearable hardware that you would never have imagined Apple being a company that would be interested in. Um, there was Apple at one point was going to go build a car. Like these companies have insatiable appetites for more and more and more and building more on that infrastructure and data and cash advantage. And so uh, I would say never in terms of what kinds of markets you might see these folks in.
that's right. So from software is eating the world to AI eating software therefore needing to go more into the physical world
Yes.
to keep up, right? So talking of physical world, I mean, we touched on a couple of things. This is another area that I think you guys also invest in. Any interesting bets there recently?
Yeah, we have a number of interesting bets in physical world of late. It's so funny. Like I'm terrible at like picking my favorite kids, if you know what I mean. I, look. I think that when when I look at some of the we have a handful of bets in different areas of robotics. We've always invested in robotics. I think that um, we're at a really we're at a sort of really weird moment in robotics because there is this idea that we're entering a world where generalized models will power, like sort of like humanoids, and that we're going to be living in this like, I don't know if it's a utopian future or a less a less optimistic future where there's a ton of humanoid robots rolling around. But I think we are. I think there's a
One doing
big,
my laundry would be
yeah,
good.
yeah.
I'd
One doing
welcome
your
a
laundry
laundry
would be
one.
good. One doing your dishes would be good. I think you will probably see verticalized robotics much sooner than you will see generalized robotics.
Mhm. All right.
I still think this is one of the categories where money is coming in, like big dollars are coming in very, very, very far in advance of real world applications. And um, even in China, like you see these incredible videos of those humanoids like doing all these amazing things on stage. I still think that we're really, really, really far away from actual commercialization. And
Yeah,
so
it's
if you're
just
investing,
technically very hard. It's very technically hard to train these models to do everything general purpose. So I agree with you. We're very far away from general purpose robotics. Vertical use cases are much easier to train to get the
yeah,
precision that they need, right? So
much
that
easier.
it,
And yeah,
maybe sort of in the physical world, let me also include pure consumer goods. I mean, you guys have been very bold and not shied away from pure consumer goods, right? So, Allbirds, Casper. How are you looking at that world now with sort of the AI impact and future
yes.
fully in scope? Now, when you look at a physical sort of goods, right? Consumer goods. How do you think about sort of what to invest in?
So look, we do much. If you just go back and sort of look at how we got into the business, we started off as early stage investors in New York at a time where New York only produced consumer companies, or ostensibly only produced New York consumer companies. And so we found ourselves in a lot of D2C companies during that like big run up wave. Learned a lot. Did much less for 4 or 5 years when brands were all looking somewhat, we were like it was just a sea of Instagram brands, and everything felt the
Mhm.
same, and there wasn't that much
Yeah.
differentiation. But still sort of unrealistic valuation expectations. Fast forward, I think that consumer goods are interesting for a few reasons. One is you have uh, AI that you can use internally to drive a huge amount of efficiency. Efficiency in your supply chain, efficiency in your marketing, efficiency in your product development, efficiency in back office, whatever it would be. I think you can run these businesses at better margin profiles than you could in the past. One. Two, um, as we talked about before, you do have an increasing number of interesting surfaces to market your products. OpenAI building a really successful advertising business is a big deal. Meta and Google have been sort of like this duopoly for a long time
Right.
in terms of performance marketing, and adding more players will theoretically lower the price to acquire users. Um, and so I think that that's an interesting opportunity for brands. There is a more natural path from ideation to launch to scale to acquisition. One of the, while venture talks a lot about the lack of DPI, one category that actually has DPI is physical consumer goods. There are, large traditional players that grow via acquisition, and you're going to continue to see that happen, I think. Um,
Mhm.
Now, those are not going to be 10 or $100 billion outcomes. And so you need to have the right size fund to be able to invest into those kind of businesses. But I think we are still within that range. Um, and then look, when we're making bets, we're trying to uh, find some unfair advantage, right? It's not just like another nice looking brand. You smack a logo on the bottle. It's the same product that your neighbor has, but with a slightly different color palette. And you hope to win in performance marketing. There have to be these. genuinely unfair advantages in terms of distribution or in terms of product development. Sometimes we're right in predicting those, and sometimes we're wrong. But uh, we continue to do deals in this space, albeit in the early funds, 75% of what we did was consumer, and now probably more like 25% of what we do will be consumer.
Yeah. Agree. And consumer is not easy. You're obviously speaking from a lot of experience. Not yet another sort of whatever face cream with influencer marketing. That's absolutely not defensible. It has to
Yeah.
be something that has much core defensibility. Any examples you can give of things that, again, maybe young bets?
Yeah, sure. And by the way, like let's talk face creams. We very recently actually did a invested in a company called Elm Biosciences, where I would say the company has highly unfair advantages. Is one, the co-founder of the business is Martha Stewart, and Martha is uh, not bad at moving product, as you might
Uh,
suspect.
uh, and
Um,
talk of brand. Talk of a
um,
brand.
and is a world class brand builder, and I think uh, is one of the kind of people that provides that unfair distribution advantage, more than just like an influencer with a following, but somebody who really brings gravitas. And then secondarily, one of the other co-founders of the business is it's actually her dermatologist, but a world class formulator, not going and just buying the same product off the line, but somebody who's really steeped in uh, the most advanced science on the cutting edge of what is possible in terms of using new ingredients and new peptides and new formulations. He was the chief formulator at Rode, Haley Bieber's company, which was just bought in a sort of venture style, really great outcome. Um, and he is obsessed with what's in the bottle and creating a really efficacious product that people love. And you see it reflected in the numbers, which is really strong repeat purchasing and sort of recurring usage behaviors. Uh, and when you pair real product love with somebody like Martha, you have a company that's gotten out of the gates very quickly, and
Yeah.
is and has highly efficient marketing and is scaling. And again, our expectation is not that that's going to be a business that's going to be a 10 or $20 billion outcome, but um, I think that they are building something uh, that has that has a reason to exist in a world where most brands today don't.
Yeah, and for early stage investors, the portfolio needs to have some mix and diversity. I mean, if the only bets are the 10 billion outcome, those come with a lot of risk, and you also can end up with a portfolio of zero. So you need a diversity of investments. And this one sounds like a cream I must try. So noted. And
No, yes,
count in
please.
one more customer for Martha.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, you mentioned earlier only 25% of the investments are consumer. You're doing a lot of B2B. I mean, this is very few firms are able to pull that off successfully. You guys have. You're doing both and doing that work very well. Uh, Perhaps sort of how does the team as a whole at Lerer Hippo, these are two very different types of investments and criteria, but sort of how do you guys make that, how are you structured internally to be able to go after these consumer investments with as much conviction as you go after your B2B investments?
Yeah, that's a really
Mhm.
excellent question, and I think the reason that we are able to do both is, first of all, the fact that we are specialists in terms of stage. We only do true early stage. A lot of folks say that, and then they sort of like that's a generalization, but they flex a lot into these special things. And, A is still early or whatever. We are really only pre-seed and seed in terms of entry. And so it actually allows for some pretty simple first principles thinking around the importance of team. And, everyone who invests in VC talks about team. I probably, the earlier you go, the more you talk about it, but it really is something that is totally central to our decision making. Now, we can meet a team we love doing something we hate, and it's not the right deal for us. And but we don't see a company we love with a team that we don't really believe in as sort of like an enduring long-term potential bet, that gets us excited. And so we um, are some of the sort of nuances of a great, highly technical team building AI infrastructure different than a team that's going to go out and build a beauty product? Absolutely, absolutely. And we do have people on the team that have sort of different majors and minors in terms of where they have more experience or more pattern recognition, but um, but we are not a pod-based fund where we have like a consumer team and a whatever, whatever, whatever. Everyone is generalist. We all opine on everything that we do. Ultimately, deals get sort of carried over by an individual partner pounding the table and saying that they sort of want to and insist on doing a deal, and other people try to make them question that decision. And a lot of the same habits and the same rhythms exist whether you're building B2B or B2C early. And I do think increasingly, as you see B2B companies uh, sort of sell in through a product led growth motion, where instead of the old way of building some monolithic piece of software that you have to go convince a CFO to go buy and sort of, you know, shove down everyone's throat, most great software now is bottoms up. And so a lot of those instincts in terms of how you build a brand and how you build a great user experience and how you talk to your customer from consumer, I think is highly applicable in how you build great B2B today. And so we don't find I don't sit with a B2B founder and go, oh man, I have no idea how to help you because I did a lot of consumer. Like, we're speaking two totally different languages. I still think that there's a real place to add value, even if my instinct is sort of consumer first.
Absolutely. So no specialized folks, sort of generalists. The focus is on the quality of teams. Absolutely, very relevant. How big is the market? Is it a market we believe in,
Totally.
understand? And then I agree with you that sort of that knowledge that comes from seeing many sectors, right? You can leverage the insights from a robotics company to influence sort of certain decisions to be made in a consumer goods company and vice versa. So that particularly in a world where the boundaries are eroding, I think particularly in a post-AI world where these boundaries are really all gone and all business models have been turned upside down on your heads, I think that broad perch of seeing very different companies in very different industries can lead to much more interesting decision making, both for portfolio companies as well as for new investments. So
We hope
that
so.
makes
I
a lot of
mean,
sense. Yeah.
yeah, we hope so. I mean, I think that I would be lying if I didn't say that this is a really confusing time in business for everybody. I mean, it's the most top of funnel we've ever had, the fastest moving processes. Pricing is pretty uh, optimistic, you might say, and so uh, we do continually. We're having more of these sort of circle the wagon back to square one in terms of strategy, in terms of making sure that we don't chase the shiny object in this market. And I do think for this is exactly when you want to be a VC. Like a lot of money can be made. This is, all bets are off. Like rules will be rewritten. That is the dream of doing this job, is you get to invest at these times. It is also the most dangerous time to do this job. And I think that you will see folks who are, you know, if you play your hand wrong, this is going to be a tragic vintage. And if you play your hand right, it might be the best one ever.
That's right. Time will tell. So the best of times and the scariest of times is to invest
Yes.
now. For us as venture investors, for you as Lerer Hippeau, a founder goes to Lerer Hippeau because you're highly early stage focused. You've stayed very disciplined. You've resisted the temptation to become a platform firm. You are truly a seed firm through all your vintages, and the founders have the advantage of having a firm that sees many investments in many different industries, categories, all the way from robotics to consumer goods to B2B software, right? So that's a sort of tremendous cross-pollination of ideas. So fabulous chat. We started with drones. We started with New York Times and the death of traditional media. We touched on drone deliveries, and then healthy eating, right? So
Yep.
was to end this, any exciting portfolio news? Some exciting portfolio news you want to share with our audience?
I think maybe the thing that I would just say is, any exciting portfolio news? Well, maybe one thing I would mention is we actually have had some, after, everyone talks about sort of like the lack of DPI in this market and the fact that, exits are hard to come by, and we've actually just had a window where we had uh, a few really good exits, but I think, um, the kinds of exits that are they're really encouraging, and it's a kick in the butt and a reminder of sort of why we do this. These are 2 companies that we backed at the absolute earliest days. One is called Guideline, which is, a B2B company. Another's a consumer business called Ollie, which is in the pet food space. Both had really fabulous exits, neither of which actually, I think, got quite the credit in terms of how the press. Some companies come out with like a big headline number and everyone like makes a big deal. These companies both had very great big headline numbers, but it wasn't the way that the stories were written. So I don't think people really appreciated, um, the sort of enterprise value that these folks had created. But they these were businesses that, nothing came easy. They built over the course of, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, uh, lived through really hard cycles for their models, and their businesses. Um, and like completed that step of the journey in a big way. And I think for me and for a lot of the team here, it's, in particular, like younger folks or newer folks on the team who haven't been around, to see these kinds of like ultimate, end of the rainbow moments, was really good.
Yeah, this is what it takes. This is what early stage investing is all about. You make the bets behind a founder, behind a market. It takes time. Most companies take time. You stay disciplined in most cases where you can with the amount of capital that you raise. And at the end of the day, the company has an exit. It makes money for your LPs, which is ultimately what our business is all
That's the,
about.
the job, the whole
That is
job.
that
Yes.
is the whole job, and that's why we continue to be excited about what we do. So that is a fabulous way to end this conversation, Ben. This has been so fun, touching on so many topics, and I'm sure of great interest to the founders who are listening to this conversation. Very exciting times ahead. I hope to have you back on this show
Yes,
on your
please.
opinion as the post AI world unfolds.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Ben.